there, I just want to let you know that this is one of my oh so late spoiler movie reviews. It was recorded quite a while ago, so please keep in mind that my opinions about this movie are first impressions only, freshly expressed right after watching the film for the first time. If you want access to my full reaction to this movie, feel free to join my membership club. Details about it are in the description box below. Now, back to my spoiler review. Okay. Alright, so I'm going to touch on some things that didn't really work out for me with this movie and then cap it off with the positives because you know I like to end off on a positive note. Okay, so the main thing that I was just like, I could do without, and that's definitely related to the era of time this movie was made, and that's the soundtrack. It wasn't to my taste. It had a little bit of a mix related to, you know, what you would hear in a Matrix-like movie. But overall, aside from the one part in the film where I noted during my reaction of this movie that the song works perfect, everything else was just a bit more on the cheese factor. I don't know, it did not invoke for me to enjoy it as much as I would want to. I'll just leave it at that. So, music choices, the soundtrack of this film is not to my personal preference. Second is the pacing was a bit slow at points, and when I was watching the movie, I had maybe one or two parts where I was just like, okay, come on, move it along, move it along. The dialogue was a little too expository at times. Not to the point where it's like, oh my gosh, you know, tell me the whole story right now. But I just felt that they used the character of Anderson to represent the viewer who is getting an inside look into the world. And through teaching the rookie, you're pretty much telling the audience what's going on. It's almost like a form of narration, but through dialogue, which is very common in a lot of movies. But in this movie, although it works for helping me to understand the movie as a viewer, I felt that they should have spent just a bit more time to show and not tell so much. But it's very minor. It's very minor. It wasn't annoying to the degree that makes me not like this movie in a general sense. So those are the two main qualms or nitpicks, I would say, about this film. I can't really think of anything that stands out where I'm just like, oh gosh, you know, I could do without in this film. So that leads me to the positives, which definitely outnumber the minor cons I just mentioned. Number one positive, I like the story. Very straightforward. It's, you know, Die Hard 10.0 with minus the humor and minus perhaps a little bit more levity at times because it was very serious. But I like how straightforward it was, where it's just these two judges going in to catch a criminal. They get stuck in there under some kind of lockdown as shown in the film, and they gotta pretty much survive their way out with some hiccups, which leads to my second part of this movie that I really enjoyed, and that is they didn't make it easy. They gave so many obstacles, from the criminals within the building trying to kill these judges. You have the character Kay, who also kind of plays his part in trying to undermine Anderson, and the renegade judges that come in and pretty much get bought out by Mama to take out Judge Dredd, the Judge Dredd, and they definitely failed at that. I really enjoyed how Dredd would literally have this grimace on his face, like his mouth, that is fitting to this character. And that leads, of course, to the third part of this movie that makes it very memorable, and that's the action sequences. There was a variety of it. You had people being burnt to death. You had people being skinned alive. You had people being blown apart. There was that interesting headshot bomb in someone's mouth at some point at the beginning of the film. This movie definitely was unapologetically violent and gory and bold in its action. And I have to say that that is probably the main positive takeaway from this movie. And as for the last thing that I would say that I very much appreciated, and it was kind of a relief considering the kind of movies that's kind of put out there these days, is I liked how this movie had no particular, I gotta be careful how I say this, but it didn't have any particular subtext reflecting social commentary about men and women in these positions. Like, for instance, you have Anderson, who's a woman, you've got Judge Dredd, who's a man, and I liked how they're both doing their duties as it's supposed to be. There was not a type of commentary through dialogue where they have to kind of make it a point to, highlight the woman for certain things, and for the most part, in some of the stuff I've seen, downgrade or put down the male counterpart. So it was refreshing. And considering the fact this movie's from 2012, 2011-ish, I'm assuming, that's when pre-production on this film likely started, it made me a bit nostalgic. I wish we can kind of go back to that kind of climate where things like that wasn't put out there in the focus to preach to an audience about one particular way of viewing societal roles and norms and all that stuff. I'll just leave it at that. If you get what I'm talking about, that's great. If you don't worry about it. Overall, this movie was really entertaining. Karl Urban did a fantastic job as Judge Dredd. He definitely convinced me you don't want to be in his line of fire when he is ready to judge and execute anyone. Which now leads me a little bit to wanting to bring up the subject matter about how I came across this movie and under what context it was brought to my attention, hence why I decided to watch it now and put out this somewhat of a review about it. And that is because I was in a group argument, really, and we were just talking about certain movies and properties that depict certain types of futures, and one of the person in my group wanted me to watch this movie because, in his opinion, this movie depicts a likely future if the population grows out of hand and there's not enough people to reign in justice versus the population available. So, for instance, in this movie, they make mention that they can only respond to 6% of the actual calls, and hence why I think that they have this authority to be judge, jury, and executioner, because likely maybe the infrastructure has broken down to have a trial system, so they're trained instead to make that decision on the spot, hence judges, right? And it is frightening when you think of that as a possibility, let alone perhaps even an inevitability in a society like ours. I mean, think about it. Just imagine that could be the evolution of how things could happen, where you have law enforcement not having enough resources to prolong suspension of someone's guilt or innocence, and you just have to go by a certain code or a certain type of training that's mandated by your local government to take life, and that's just that, right? Judge, jury, executioner. So that's frightening in and of itself. So that's pretty much how this movie came to my attention, and having watched it now, my mind hasn't been changed. Listen, I'm one of those people that likes to see the glass half full, not half empty. In my opinion, if this is going to be a likely future, well, until that future comes to pass and I am alive to see it, then so be it. But for me, it's just one possibility, but not inevitability, that could happen to modern day society out of many, many movies that depict their own version of a future that is pretty cray-cray. So overall, there you have it. Those are my general thoughts after watching Dredd for the first time. I'm not sure if I'm going to bother try watching the Sylvester Stallone version from a bazillion years ago. I don't even know if that's available on any particular streaming service, what thereof. But if you've watched the Stallone version, let me know in the comment section. I don't mind, as long as you put spoiler before your comment for other readers, for their sake. You can let me know the differences between both films. Was this film the better remake? And I was wondering if this movie was based on a comic book, because I didn't expect the character of Anderson to be revealed as a mutant with psychic powers, somewhat of an Xavier type character. And so I am curious if it's based on a comic book, and I wouldn't be surprised if it is. It's just something I'm curious about in a general sense, and I'll go check it out for myself. There you have it. That is my review and takeaways or general thoughts about Dredd. I look forward to watching more movies, perhaps like this, that is based on telling me, the viewer, possible futures, whether good or bad. You know, most of the time they're bad anyway, in my opinion. So, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. And until my next so late movie review, I'm Asha, tuning out. Bye. Thanks for watching. Check out my other videos and subscribe. You know you wanna.